So the next bit of preparation before we put the frame and the shadow box together is to actually ink up the rest of our chipboard. I've decided I'm going to do mine with Vintage Photo and none of the greens, just the Vintage Photo, because I think it'll make the greens stand out a little bit more. I'm using Distress Oxides, but you could use just normal Distress ink or whatever ink pads you've got. Again, I'm using my brush because I find it easier. I'll start with the background. Now you don't need to do all of this because this is going to stick on there. So you basically just need to do the outside edges. I'm also going to do these, which fit into the edges of our previous panel. I'm going to do both sides of those. I'm also going to do both of these. But because you won't see hardly any of this back bit, I'm just going to do the edges. So what I'll do is I'll start with this. I'll show you how I'm going to do this, and then I'll stop the video, do the rest, and then put the frame together. So again, I'm just adding ink to our frame. If you wanted it darker, you could do it with sort of walnut stain Distress ink, whatever colour you wanted really. Just be careful if you're going to touch the frame with your fingers, put a piece of paper on it so that you don't get finger marks. I'll keep turning it round and inking it up. And you will get a little bit of ink on the back from your glass mat. The chipboard's got a little bit of a texture to it, and it does pick up that texture, which is quite nice. So that's my underneath frame. I'm going to add a bit more up there. I think I've had my fingers on it. There we are, so that's that bit. Put that over there. Then, now this you'll have to be very, very careful with because it is very fragile. This is the top part of the frame. Again, hang on to it and be very, very gentle. If you've got the other kinds of brushes for inking, be exceptionally careful. Hold one bit, just do a little bit with the brush next to where you're holding it and work your way along, because they are a little bit, they aren't as soft as a makeup brush and they may damage your frame if you brush too heavily. You could also, as I say, use a sponge blending tool, but in that case you'd do a dabbing motion like this, because then you aren't moving the chipboard and damaging it. I don't mind a slightly mottled effect on my chipboard frame, so I'll do a little bit with the sponge and a little bit with the brush, Just remember, whatever you do in one area, do it everywhere. Because I was showing you how to use a sponge, I'll now do sponge work everywhere so that it looks the same. I do prefer a brush, but I realise not everybody has these. It takes a little bit longer with a brush, but I think you get a better effect. And you just keep adding it and working it till you've got the effect you want. So this is a straight bit I can go over and I won't damage it. Be very, very careful if you do use your sponge. There we are. So that's our top layer of our frame, which will go over there eventually. And you see I've done it slightly darker so that it stands off a little bit. So we'll pop those away for the moment, and then you would do the same with the back and the front of your side panels, just so they match in colour. You don't have to be as careful with these as in getting them even, because you don't see much of them, but it's just so they match. And I do both sides so that when you're looking at the side of the piece, you don't have the sort of pale cream that's quite prominent if you don't colour them all up. So when you've done all of those, set your chipboard aside so that it's out of the way, and any ink that you've got left on your glass mat you can spritz with water and you can pick up with just plain printer paper, and you've got some another background to keep and you're not wasting this ink. So the next step is to actually attach the sides to our shadow box. It's quite simple, just takes a little bit of wiggling sometimes. I put the tiniest little bit of glue on all these little lugs, and I do one at a time. You don't need much, just for it to stick. The thing to remember is you have to have matching sides and tops and bottoms. So you'll see these have got a little lug on two strips. I'm going to put those at the side. The other matching ones have got a hole for that lug to go in. I'm going to have those top and bottom. So I'm going to pop my chipboard in at one side with the glue on. Another little bit of glue on here. Probably would have been better with the glue on the other side, but anyway, as long as it's on one side. You can do, if you get surplus glue which you think will show, you can just wipe it away with a cotton bud. Then the top and the bottom, a little bit of glue again on these three little bits that stick out. Pop those into the corresponding holes. This is where you have to have a little bit of wiggle room. In, and I'm going to put a little tiny bit of glue just on the corners so that they stick together. So that's on that side, and again on here I have a little bit of glue. Don't know if you can see that, but I've put it on the bits where they come together, a bit like a dovetail joint but squared, so they are into the base and the two corners are stuck. I'll do the same again with the top and bottom. So I'll have it this way around. And if my glue seeps, it won't show. That's it. And again on the joint. That side, come on, go in. And you can see when they're lined up. It's quite easy to see when they're lined up. And because I'm using PVA, I've got a little bit of time to sort of wiggle them around and get them correct. Now, before they completely set and dry, I find it easiest to put the top layer on. So this is the bit that takes a little bit of wriggling. I put glue on all the flat recessed bits, and you'll find that some of your bits while you're gluing will come apart, but don't worry, you've got time to adjust them all and get them all in line. Don't smother the chipboard with glue. It doesn't need it, it just needs enough to hold everything together. So with your piece the right way up, your corners hopefully in and your sides still in, pressed in, you then put your top on. So I start at the bottom, get these lined up and in, which takes a little bit of doing. Then work round to the sides and get those in. Come on, go in. Then back up to the top, get those in. Got one that's just a little bit out there. This is the trickiest bit of the whole thing, getting all these lined up and into the lugs. That's definitely right. And in, that one needs to be in a bit further. So I've got those three are definitely right. Those three are definitely in. The top and the side are fighting back a little bit. That's nearly there. It's this one that isn't quite in. That's in. And because it's quite flexible, you can sort of jiggle it about until it goes in correctly. Right. And then we'll hold them just while they're set for a little bit. Just keep pressing them down gently till it grabs. Make sure you've got your corners correct. That's it. That corner's a little bit out. There we are. Now normally you would let this completely dry. That one is just a little bit out. Just put a little bit more glue on this corner here, just to make sure it sticks. That's better. If you've got bits that aren't sticking, just add a little bit more glue and hold it down till it stops. That's it. So that is our first frame on, and then I'm going to glue this on, and if it's positioned correctly it will cover up the holes in the frame where the little lugs are. So like that. So take my frame off. You've got to be fairly speedy with this, and you don't need to cover every single inch of the chipboard. I tend to put little dots every so often so that I've got some on most sections. Otherwise, if you try and cover every inch, your glue will dry before you get it all on. So you can see I'm just putting dobs here, there and everywhere, not completely covering all the chipboard. If I've got too much, I'll just get it off with my finger. So you can see I'm just going every so often round. Just make sure it isn't going to go over the edge. And then we'll bring our frame back, turn this over and try and get it matched up. First time now, I've got a bit of glue that's going to show there. So I'll just get it off with my finger. Nearly. Because I've got distress ink on here, if I get glue where I don't want it and I try and brush it off, it will reactivate my ink. So try not to move it. Once you've got it on in the right place, it is fairly easy to line up. And then just set it aside to dry. Yeah. I think that's more or less the right place, because it's covered all the little lugs up that attach this frame to the side walls. So that's looking good. When that's completely dry, I will then attach it to the back frame. Now, the easiest way to do this so that it stands, and hopefully you'll be able to see this, is to line the bottom of the back panel up with the edges of the bits where this comes in, so that it stands up like that. Actually, it's at the bottom of the panel if you want it to stand. If you want it to hang, you don't need to do this, but basically the bottom of your back panel, this edge here, needs to line up with this edge here if you want it to stand rather than hang, because otherwise it won't stand up on its own. So I'll let that dry and then I'll attach it to the back panel, and then I'll put my finishing touches on. I think I'm going to add some of this on the outside because I've got some of this left. I'll ink it up like this and add it on the outside, but I will see when we've got that far. Here we are. So you can see I've got the glue on the back of my panel, and I am going to line it up with the base there, and so that I know I've got it in the right place, I'm going to stand it up, make sure it stands okay, and then press it on. I might do it so it just leans. And I know that stands okay, so I'm now going to put it down, make sure it's completely lined up evenly. Needs to go a touch that way, that's it. And then press it on. There we are. Right, so we're back with our nearly finished shadow box. I'm just going to add 2 little bits of the vine, one here and one there. They were originally, if I can get them lined up again, just can't remember how they were, something like that. They were a semicircle basically, like that. It was this one here, went round in a circle. So I popped it back into the carrier sheet as we did before to ink it up. So it was in there, inked it up, and then I cut it into 2, because you can cut these, you don't have to leave them just as they are. And I'm just going to add it in here and there. If you notice on the chipboard, there's some little bunches of grapes. They're not immediately obvious, but you wouldn't want them going upside down. So these grapes are coming down here and here. If you wanted to, you could colour them in so that they would tie in with the colours of everything else, like green grapes with a felt tip or something like that. I wasn't bothered about them being that obvious, so I've just done them in this nice green colour, and I'm just going to glue them on there and there, making sure that nothing goes below this level here, which will be where your shadow box stands. If I'm gluing on a delicate chipboard, I tend to put PVA on my hand. Don't do this if you've got allergies to PVA. Spread it out so it's a thin layer. I then just dab the chipboard on my hand to pick up the PVA. That way you don't get a lot of excess. So I'm going to go just on there like that, and then that will just stick it on. And I'll do the same with the other one. Pick up the PVA off my hand. And pop it on there. It is very delicate, so make sure that you've got any delicate bits attached to this top framework. Yeah, that's it. So that is our finished shadow box. I hope you like that, and I hope you give it a go.